Yeah.
So, to minimize, and what we're going to try to do here, we're too far behind, right? We're out of here at 4, right?
You said 4:30, but
4:30, okay, good. Yeah, so we're good. So we're going to do this little practice forum. I'm going to walk through these 5 choices, and I'm going to get 3 of y'all to volunteer to facilitate. And then we'll kind of go back into facilitation mode. This is just a 1-page framing on childhood obesity, so you'll have to be one of the facilitators because this is one of your issues, I think. We'll see who else wants to do it. So another kind of NIF simple framing. So you can start kind of looking at that a little bit. I purposely, when I do my training, we try to throw people in before they feel they're ready, right? Particularly because I work with really smart students. You know, you're honor students that apply for my program, we get to handpick them. And they normally think this is going to be pretty easy, right? So the sooner I throw them in to try to facilitate, the more they realize, like, man, I'm doing 10 things at a time. So then they take the lectures and the discussion a little more seriously as they got to go through. But this page 57 is kind of the easy, kind of quick. Here are 5 basic moves that basically facilitate. This is all encompassing. There's other moves that's a little better advanced, right? But if you get these 5 moves down, you're in pretty good shape. Before the 5 basic moves, the first thing that we normally do is a starting question. My starting question for every approach was a very broad one. It's the first initial reactions. What do y'all think about this approach? What do you like? What do you not like? I add the what do you like or not like just to frame it that that's the conversation we want to have is appreciations and concerns, right? Again, to kind of frame the notes. But then there's 5 other moves that we make. The first move is move on. You notice that almost every single time someone wanted to talk, right? Most times there was 2 or 3 hands up when I asked the question, and I kind of had to organize things. So I think I gave you the next page too, right? Yeah, 58. So 58 talks about stacking. What stacking is, y'all might already know this as professors, it's just the order of people talking, right? So people raise their hands, I might have said, okay, we'll start here, and then we'll go here, and then we'll go to Ashley or whatever, right? We do the stacking because if you don't, people, if it's first one to talk wins, right? Everyone is focused on raising their hand and getting my attention or whatever. So by me acknowledging, or the same thing, as someone was talking, if someone else raised their hand, I try to look at them, make eye contact, and kind of point to them, okay, I see you, right? So they can stop focusing on getting my attention and hopefully actually listen to the person already talking, right? But this is another thing that we learned that, again, people showed up because they care about the issue. They decided to spend their time, right? So when I asked the question, normally everyone wanted to talk, right? So say I asked the initial question, 5 people want to talk, I let you talk first. You start, you say something for 2 minutes, but you both raise your hand. So I call, well, here, then here, and she says something really interesting, or provocative, or controversial, or whatever, right? But if I go to you next, right, you're not responding to her because you raised your hand before she talked, right? So we realized if we followed the stack, we would have an individual collection of opinion. We would not have interaction. We didn't have discussion, right? So then we recognized that the stack is not the next person to speak, right? The next person in line is almost like the next person to change the topic, right? So as a facilitator, if 3 people were in line, oh, here, then Ashley, and then you spoke, when you finish speaking, I have a decision to make, right? Do I go on to the next person, or do we talk about what you talked about first, right? And we saw that from the very beginning, right? I think Thomas was the first. Oh no, maybe we're good. The question becomes, because you have this impulse, like, I want everyone to talk first, right? But then the first person says something that you want to dig deep into, right? So what I would do is, if you said something that's interesting enough that I wanted to spend some time on, I wanted to do depth versus breadth, right? I might say, okay, I know you're next, right? But let's stick with this for a bit, right? Or I might ask them different questions with that, and you'll see the different questions that we can ask, right? That's one of the basic moves of a facilitator. Just because you have 5 people in line, right? You want to honor the stack. So I normally would say, I know you're next, but, right? And then after we kind of go through, okay, so who, you want to go. But again, it's that concept of the stack is the next person to kind of start a new thread of conversation versus the next person to speak. Right? And one way to visualize this is the notes, and again, we probably didn't get it. I didn't pay too much attention to this because, again, there were too much behind me, right? But what I want notes from this is like, here's a topic, here's 4 or 5 comments about the topic. Here's another topic, and here's 4 or 5, instead of here's 20 comments, right? Because the topic and 4 or 5 comments means people are interacting, right? So move on is just pick the next person. That's most of your intervention, but that is complicated. Paraphrasing is huge. I gave you a whole page on paraphrasing. I think I left that one, right? Page 60. Paraphrasing is a critical skill for facilitators for lots of different reasons. If you look at page 60 for a second, there's a lot of good things that you can do with paraphrasing, and there's some bad things you can do with paraphrasing. Whenever you're paraphrasing, you're really saying that I'm better at words than you are, right? So you want to be careful with that, right? One of my favorite professors that has helped us train is a great paraphraser, but she paraphrases everything, right? So after the 12th speaker, you're like going, okay, enough, right? But essentially note-taking is paraphrasing. Wendy was just constantly paraphrasing. She wasn't writing word for word what you said, right? She was capturing what you said, trying to use your words as much as possible, individual specific words, but summarizing it slower, right? But paraphrasing can be important. I don't tend to paraphrase that much. I probably did a few examples, right? Okay, we train to paraphrase always as a question. Okay, what I'm hearing is this, is that right? Always make it easier for someone to kind of correct your paraphrase or say, no, you got it wrong. That moving from positions to interest and kind of talking about values, paraphrasing is a way to do that. So what I'm hearing is safety is a critical issue for you, right? What I'm hearing is the fact that things are unequal, so you're bringing out values, and that there's a power in paraphrasing that, especially when people disagree with each other, right? It's very hard for people that really disagree with each other to listen to that other person. But your paraphrase might all of a sudden like, oh, that's what they're saying, and shift that conversation. So there's a lot of power, I think, in paraphrase. We have our students do paraphrase practice. We make them watch city council meetings, so the one at a time with a microphone, and pause it between each person, say paraphrase. Right? At home, they can do paraphrase practice, right? Or watch a debate, right? And after someone makes an argument, pause and say, how would you paraphrase? How would you pull the actual argument there? Sometimes the paraphrase is huge for the note taker. If the note taker is frozen, doesn't know what to write, right? For the facilitator to paraphrase. You can ask other participants, you can ask people to paraphrase themselves. So that intervention when people are talking too much to say, can you summarize? No, I want to make sure we get this in a note right. But can you summarize what you're saying in one sentence? Right? You're asking them to paraphrase. Right? A great move for conflict when if you teach says that two people are going back and forth, but I like to say is, can someone else help us here? What are we arguing about? What's the difference here? Right? Let someone else kind of paraphrase that. A gets them to stop talking, right? It gets someone else talking, right? But then it also changes the conflict, gets everyone else to talk about that conflict, right? Instead of them dominating the conflict. So paraphrase is very powerful, but again, it's also difficult. Well, paraphrase is also deals with, this is controversial in some ways, you can see, but part of the problem with deliberation is you're relying on people having a quality of being able to communicate well. And some people communicate better than others, right? Some people are better communicators, some people are more educated, some people English is their second language, sometimes it's not, right? So sometimes the facilitator can play a critical role in equalizing things, that people that aren't as good at expressing themselves, the facilitator can hopefully, as a good listener, pull out their idea and paraphrase it, right? But at the same time, that's a power move, right? That's also kind of saying, gee, I'm better at this, So we've got to be careful in that sense of using paraphrase too much to say that I speak better than you, right? I'm a much gooder speaker. But that's part of that process, right? So paraphrasing is a critical art. Jump back again to then the last three basic moves are types of questions, right? And I try to model these as we went through. So first is a probing question or a follow-up question. So a probing question is a question to the person that just spoke, right? So I'm digging deeper. I'm getting them to explain a little bit more, right? Very first thing Thomas talked about is I really like math classes, right? I pushed you a little bit on that. And you notice I also, it's called tracking, right? Because you said two things. I like the math classes, but I don't know if I like the businesses being involved, right? So I kind of split that to take them one at a time. Okay, let's talk first about math, right? I asked the probing question first, right? Tell me why is math important to you, right? To kind of get that out a little bit. And then I asked a reaction question. What else do people think about that? Right? So probing and reaction on the next one. So probing is asking that person to dig a little deeper. People tend to make lots of surface arguments. I really like approach 2. Tell me why you like approach 2, right? Tell me why that's important to you. Why do you care about that, right? So you're following up in a sense to get them to talk about it. And then the reaction question is you're sticking with the topic, but you're getting other people to react. What do people think about that? Right? Before we move on, you notice one time Maria raised her hand in the middle of someone talking about what it was. I didn't know if she was reacting to that idea or just something else popped in her head, right? So I kind of asked, is it about this or something else? Right? And again, that's that controlling, because the person just said something that was useful. I want to spend some time on it, right? But the new hand going up, you don't know if, I want to react to that to the news. You control that somewhat. Right? And then hopefully go back to Maria when you're ready to move on. Right? So then the last question is a transition question. This is where you actually change the subject, right? This is where you as a facilitator, and one of our techniques, I told you earlier that these little 1-page, 2-page kind of handouts, we call them a placemat, right? So the technique, we call it punting to the placemat, right? This is another way of negotiating the first and second responsibility. You want to be impartial, and you want to kind of then control the conversation, but as a facilitator, you know you're ready to switch, right? We beat this idea to death, right? We only got 20 minutes. We want to talk about a few different aspects of this approach, right? So the easiest way to do that without dictating is that, look back at this approach. I didn't have to do this here because y'all were pretty varied and kind of jumped around, right? But looking back at here, looking back at the examples, what haven't we talked about that we need to talk about? Right? I think at least once I said trade-offs, right? Yeah, I planted the placemat right there. I'll look at these. What do y'all think about these trade-offs? Do y'all agree or disagree with any of those, right? So that's where I'm not saying, look at trade-off number 2. What do y'all think about that? That's much more specific. I might do that, right? But the easiest way, again, the different levels of binary impartiality is look back at here, what else do we need to talk about, right? Or I might pick one thing we need to talk about, right? Those kind of things. So transition questions. My students right now have picked topics for practice forums. They'll be doing practice forums on Tuesday. They've already been signed their issue book and their approach, and they're developing questions, right? So there's some questions you can develop beforehand. And I tell them each issue, each approach probably has 4 or 5 pretty useful ideas to really explore. So kind of come up with a question for each of those. But then be ready not to use them, right? Because the conversation flows pretty well, you might not need to, but you have in your pocket at least 5 transition questions to say, one of the ideas here is about this. What do you think about that? And I particularly like the transition questions that highlight tensions, right? There's a tension here, what do y'all think about that? Yeah.
Your move to the trade-off question was really good in the second approach too, because there was a high level of consensus.
Correct.
So then it kind of moved to.
Yeah, so it's that same thing. If everyone agrees, everyone likes an approach, everyone doesn't like an approach, you tend to then say, well, one of my favorite ideas, one of my favorite questions is always, people that really would support this approach, what's important to them? Right? It's that perspective-taking question. And it's funny because that normally gets a funny answer first, right? Someone will kind of say, wow, because they're greedy, like money, or they hate poor people or whatever. And then someone says, well, I guess they might care about, and then it opens up this conversation and they realize when you're really pushing people that disagree with you, what's important to them, right? We don't tend to do that psychologically, right? We want the people that disagree with us to not have good values, right? We want them just to be evil, right? But then when we really think about, okay, what do they care about? How can I make a really good argument against what I believe, right? Is a powerful kind of transition question or a powerful kind of perspective-taking question, right? That you kind of set up, right? So yeah, those are basically the 5 basic moves. You're either moving on, and that's often there's hands up, so it's pretty easy to always just say next speaker, right? You're paraphrasing for a purpose, right? To help the notes, to help dig deeper, to open up the conversation, to help people understand each other. The best paraphrases is when you paraphrase and the person says, yes, that's it, right? That's exactly what I mean, right? Then you feel like, hey, I've made a contribution. You're asking a probing question, which again is a question of that person. You're asking a reaction question, which is getting everyone else to talk about that. Reaction questions are obviously critical for interaction, right? We don't ask enough reaction questions. To get away from the one at a time in the microphone or the individual question of opinion, we need more reaction questions. And then the transition question, obviously the transition question is the facilitator taking the most power, right? I'm going to decide what we're talking about now, right? So you got to be careful with how you do that, and you tend to kind of leave them pretty flexible. Thoughts, questions, pushback? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, how do you end as a facilitator? So I mean, yeah, but
we have 2 minutes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's, normally when we do these in the public, right, the same facilitator does the whole thing, right? So you're transitioning from approach 1 to approach 2, and basically you, like I said before, your impulse is to summarize, and it's so hard to summarize well, right? Part of, you can rely on the notes here, right? So you can, if you feel the need to summarize, you can say, obviously we kind of capture all these notes as we go. That's kind of summarizing. If I've done a good job in the front of the room, people know what information we're capturing, what we're doing with that information, what the next step is. They know that within a week on our website will be the raw, so a lot of that closure kind of stuff is there. Because it is difficult. like I said, with the painter, the growth zone graphic, it
Yeah.
says come to closure,
Yeah.
but we tend not to do that.
Yeah, because-
We're not making a decision, right? We're not voting at the end. We're using this group to really think through the issue, but sometimes the groups are making decisions in some ways. Sometimes we use the key, I guess there's closure at the individual table and there's a closure in the large group. When we talk about process design tomorrow, one of the things that we talk about is closure. Like, what do we do? Because I love the advantage of small groups, but whenever you have small groups, then you have everyone wanting to know what's happening with all the other groups. I tend to hate report outs. Right? That notion of you have a big group, and at each table someone stands up and says, "Yeah, we talked about this and this and that." I think those are painful and horrible. Right? Because you can't do them well, right? And B, especially if it's a controversial issue, who at the table does that, right? So we still do report out sometimes, but I tend to use the keypads. So we kind of at the end of the, prioritize some ideas, get some sense of people have something. I tend to do, if we have public notes in some sense, I like to do worksheets that we can then post around the room. So we create a gallery walk. If people want to, they can walk around and see what other tables did, so there are all these little mechanisms you can do to kind of give people a little bit of sense of closure. Almost always, when we're doing an event, it's a long-term event. We like to already have the next date set, even if the next date is just a report. Like, in 3 weeks we'll have a report out if you're in, so that people feel like, because we know the impulse to think this conversation is a great conversation, but now it's gone in the wind, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do to make people feel like this conversation has been captured, right? And there's people that are focused on understanding this. And another way we do this is most of our events are based on prior conversations, right? Whether it's a survey or those type of things. So we normally start our event saying, this is what we heard last time, right? This is what we're doing this time because, so people who went to the last event feel heard, like, oh wow, they're actually reacting to what we talked about. And then also, hopefully they take a little bit more, solace in the sense of, well, they listened to the people last time, so hopefully they'll be listening to us this time, right? And that becomes a chilling effect. That's one of my concerns, that people that do this work that aren't situated there, that don't have a long-term view, is you can have a great conversation, but if you have a great conversation and nothing ever happens from it, it creates a chilling effect, and they're less likely to show up the next time and those type of things, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah, so I took it a little broader than you're at, but closure is, the table has
I
closure.
think it's the hardest part, actually,
Yeah.
maybe, because you have all of those ideas,
Yeah.
and then you have to choose something.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that we do for closure is we tend to have surveys, right? And we look, like one of my favorite questions at the very end, and we normally do this as a round, is, we've just had this 2-hour conversation. Say we're doing something for the city council, we might have a question of, what's the most important thing that you think the city council should know from this conversation, right? And we ask them to write it down. We'll say, we'll type it up word for word, right? So then we always have this, so they've had this full conversation, they've seen the different sides of the issue, and that's kind of another way to provide closure. People feel like, okay, I'm going to write this down, and these very words are going to go in front of the city council in some senses. We'll collect all those. So yeah, there's a lot of little kind of processing that we think about.
I think too,
Yeah.
like, it's also how you communicate what the point of the deliberation is. So if you're doing it in your classroom, and we have tons of research, even on the events that we've done at UHD, that these events increase learning, increase understanding of other people, increase understanding of our own position, increase knowledge. So it can even be couched, like if you're doing it in a classroom, as just for the educational benefits.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to move to action, depending on what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's, some people have taken a much more social scientific bent to this work. So we do have empirical work of like, to what degree has there been knowledge gains, and to what degree has there been significant movement of opinion, that kind of stuff that shows this work. Right? Yeah, that closure is kind of a tough thing. I tend, like say if we do an NIF stuff, I really don't want to do a vote at the end in terms of which approach do you like the most, right? Because then that becomes the story, right? And we want to keep it at the arguments in a sense. So that's why we try to kind of do these worksheets. Like when we were doing the river stuff, right? We had people complete worksheets that were based on the NIF model, because the river we had these 4 approaches of how do we deal with water. Like we slow down growth, that we increase water conservation efforts, that we do more water storage, like build more reservoirs, or we kind of take water from 85% of the water goes to agriculture now, right? So like the recognition that we can't have that much agriculture. We need to kind of spread the water around more, right? So we have these 4 approaches, and none of them magic bullets, all of them have trade-offs. And then we had these worksheets that at the end of each approach, we gave people like 3 minutes to write. Okay, from that approach, what did you like the most when? And it was interesting because it was a very polarized issue, right? So we knew some people really didn't want new storage, and some people really didn't want agriculture to be affected at all, and this kind of stuff. Some people really wanted, in our community in particular, there's a lot of no growthers, right? Let's not let anyone else in, right? Which isn't realistic, right? The only way to really stop people coming to your community is to make your community suck, right? And that kind of defeats the purpose, right? But through the conversation, people filled in all the boxes. We thought people would fill in, like, these are the reasons why I like my approach, and these are the reasons I don't like another approach. But the fact that people admitted to flaws in their perspective and recognized advantages of their opposing perspective, I think was huge, right? But, so they filled out those worksheets, and after the 4th approach, we picked up the worksheets, and we had a few more questions at the table, but then as there was still conversation, I, along the wall, kind of put these all up. We had all these, easels, and we just taped up every single one of those worksheets, so that people can kind of get up at the end and look at everyone else's work, right? And plus, we told them, as soon as we leave here, I'm going back to my office, I'm scanning all of these, they'll be online by 10 o'clock tonight, right? The raw data from everybody, in a sense, right? And that's kind of some of the transparency, so people really feel leaving, like, this matters, people are listening to this. When people know that the notes taken at the table are going to be typed up in part of the report, they know their specific word is going to be